Okay. So welcome everyone to this travel group meeting. And I wish to acknowledge, first of all, that I live in the unceded ancestral and traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And I expect that some of you live in other parts of BC and in different territories. So today we actually have a double presentation, all to do with local travel on the water. And I'm pleased to start first with Helen and Richard Spencer. And the second half will go straight on from their session to talk by Ben Schneidman and Jenny Priest. Okay, so Helen, now you can, if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen, we can get started with your presentation.
Okay, is everyone seeing the title page?
No,
Not yet.
Sorry.
Yes or no?
No, you're not sharing.
Oh, well, that's awkward.
It was before. Now you are starting to share.
Okay.
Now we can see your screen.
All right, I've gone one slide ahead doing that. Let me just go back. Oh, here we go. So, if you have a good memory, you might recall that this talk was titled 5 Days on a Landing Craft in the Georgia Strait. It's been corrected to 6 days on a landing craft. We were never in the Georgia Strait. We were in the Broughton Archipelago. So let me say a little bit about the company that runs the tours or trips that we were on. It's called Marine Link Tours. It's based in Campbell River. It's a very small company, owns one ship. The owner of the company comes down and chats with the passengers before departure. They run 2 routes. We were on the Broughton Archipelago trip, which is in a region mainly northwest of Campbell River. The alternate trip is Discovery Island, and that's east of Campbell River. They do 33 trips each year from March to October. The first trip this year starts on Monday. Most of their dates are sold out for 2025. There are a few cabins available here and there. In 2024, it costs $7,300 for Helen and me for the 6 days, 5 nights. So the ship that we're on is a landing craft. It's a working cargo ship. It was built in 1970. It's 130 feet long, 34 feet wide, has twin diesel engines, carries 12 passengers in 6 twin berth cabins, and there's a crew of 5. So the kind of area that we were doing our trip in is outlined here in yellow. Here, of course, is Vancouver Island. Vancouver's down here, Campbell River, and we were cruising in this area. So we started off at Campbell River. From there, you go up through the Seymour Narrows, where Ripple Rock used to be, up Discovery Passage, and then we were mainly in Johnstone Strait, which runs along here, and in the archipelago to the north. So the first night we were in Hemming Bay. By the second night, we'd got up to Jackson Bay with a rather roundabout route that took us over quite an area. From there, we went to Beaver Cove. We basically came down here up Johnstone Strait. From there, we went up here to Scott Cove. On the last full day, we did a very long trip, came all the way down here, right back almost to where we went, or in fact, to where we went on the first day, and finally back here, and we stopped at Shoal Bay. The last day, we went down and back to where we started, getting there at about 2 p.m.
We do recognize that we are not experts. This is a 5-day trip, the first time we've been here, and we know that many of you have actually probably spent a lot of time in this area, and bear with us in our ignorance. We're still on shore at the moment. Karen, our very calm, competent, and efficient steward, is standing on the left. She's made the trip really, really pleasant. Richard and I are next to her. Then we have a pleasant couple from Vancouver Island and a lovely couple from England. And on the right, our 4 good friends from Vancouver. The last passenger, the single man, only just made it. He arrived just before the ship left.
Yeah, so as Helen said, what we're going to talk about is this trip. This is not a geographical exposition by any means. This is the ship that we were on. As I said, it's 130 feet long. It noses right up onto the beach, drops the landing craft ramp, and puts cargo on or unloads it. This is a photograph of a plan of the ship that was hanging on board. So this is the hull, 130 feet long. The cargo rolls on. It's just a flat deck. The ramp underneath the deck, there are fuel tanks and so forth. The diesel engines are in a pod that hangs under the hull, so that kind of limits where it can nose up to the beach. Our cabins were on the second deck, along with accommodation for the crew. On the third deck was the lounge, dining area, kitchen, etc. Above that was the bridge where the captain or the mate would be driving the ship. So this was a photograph taken just before we left. You can see this is Marine Link up here. We loaded from a little building here. They took our luggage, put it on the ship for us. We walked down, walked on. One of the nice things about a trip like this, there's no security. You don't need a passport. You can arrive at the last minute, as one passenger did. They probably are not going to go without you as long as you're not more than 15 or 20 minutes late. It's very informal, but it's also a working trip. It's well managed. Passengers are never allowed on the loading deck unless they're going ashore or boarding the ship. You can see on here a large kind of backhoe. That's for unloading cargo. There's a forklift truck for the same reason. You can see the cargo. It includes a lot of diesel fuel, some in a large trailer here, and some just tucked away here in a little truck.
So this was our cabin. It was very small at the stern of the ship. The beds were quite comfortable. There were 2 separate, there was a drawer at each bed for us to store our things and a row of hooks to hang our clothes. There was a separate bathroom, shower and toilet all in one. And you can see one of the windows. There was another window to the left looking out to the stern. But notice the stick propped up in the window to keep it closed. We didn't have too much of a problem, but we know that some other people, their windows leaked really, really badly. And we were absolutely assured that next trip they would all be replaced. I do hope so.
So this is just the dining and lounge area. You could see there's a table here for 8 people, table here for 4, comfortable chairs for us to sit in. There was a refrigerator with some cold drinks and a snack area. Very comfortable, nice view out.
We were lucky enough on the first 2 days to have some lovely weather. And I took this photo going up Frederick Arm, and it was truly beautiful. Majestic reflections, lovely sky, very, very calm. The next photo also is in Frederick Arm. It's a very pretty part of the world. Lovely reflections, rippled water. Yeah, you will really enjoy this trip if you get weather like that.
Yeah, so this is a photograph I took just to show that couple of things. The ship gets very close to shore. It's very shallow draft, so you get excellent views onto land. And, you know, the forest, the clear cutting, the regrowth, the various color in the trees, it can make, I think, a very interesting little vista to look out on. So a big part of the trip is the landings to take on and unload freight. I have, yeah, just forget. One of the major cargoes that they carry is fuel. This is a stop at a logging camp. You can see it's not highly developed. There's a dirt road here. There's a truck with a tank on it. And they are going to unload diesel from one of the tanks. We can see one here through a hose and fill the tank that's on the back of the truck. One of the places that we went past is Sonora Lodge, which is not surprisingly on Sonora Island, quite near the end of Discovery Passage. Really showing you this photo to show that although it's very isolated in the area where we were, and access is only by sea or floatplane, there's no road access, there are some quite extensive developments. This is quite an upmarket fishing lodge.
And this is going to be a short video of sea lions. Richard, would you like to play that, please? These sea lions are on rocks fairly close to Sonora Lodge, but generally speaking, we didn't get many chances to photograph wildlife. That night during dinner, orcas played around the boat to our great delight, but we couldn't photograph them. The next day, the weather was changing. It was getting dark, but we could see humpbacks, many humpbacks spouting in the distance in the rain, and they were rolling their dark bodies in the water. It was wonderful.
So this photograph was taken just after we saw the sea lions. And this is just nosing into the landing for that resort that I showed you. It's discreetly placed so that the people staying in the resort can't see the workers bringing food, etc. We're just nosing into the landing there. Also of interest was this rusty old drum. Helen, I think you know what the reason for it.
I think I heard that it was going to be taken to be recycled. It might have even been copper, but it puzzled many of us.
Another example of a landing here, they've taken this heavy piece of equipment off the boat so they can hoist a piece of machinery. This is actually for taking the bark off trees. It's a debarker. I believe they were delivering it to the island after it had been maintained. I may be mistaken. Maybe they were removing it. Yeah, so just one more landing.
And before we landed here, we were moored to a log boom. And I woke up before the sun rose and I heard noises and I looked out the window and I could see a machine working under lights, lifting logs, I guess placing them in the log boom. It was really interesting to me that they just don't waste any time at all.
And I think this is the last landing I'm going to show you. And it's just to make the point that part of the business and part of the responsibility of marine tours is to service small domestic dwellings. It's not all logging camps and large resorts. So this is a house being built. The landing craft has come right up to their property. They're dropping off drywall, again, using this large piece of equipment. And that's the kind of thing, if you take this trip, you're going to see a lot of. Most of it, I think most of us found quite interesting.
And this is Kelsey, our excellent cook. She was a young Indigenous woman, and she did everything. She planned the meals, she bought the food, she cooked and plated meals for 5 crew and, as it turned out, 11 passengers. There was a continental breakfast between 7 and 8, a full breakfast, if you needed it, between 8 and 9, lunch between 12 and 1, and dinner 6 to 7. There was coffee, tea, soft drinks available anytime you wanted, and she made fresh cookies every day. That's her kitchen. There were double ovens. It was very clean, not very big, but she did a fantastic job. And I'm quite sure that the steward, Karen, helped her with this a bit too. Her meals were appetizing. This lunch was delicious. It makes me hungry to look at it. Breakfast, that was one of the smaller breakfasts. Some of us said, you know, the meals are too large for us. Would you make them smaller? So that was an option for some of us. Waffles, strawberries, coffee. And here we have a spinach salad. And this was halibut. I do wish I had taken a photograph of her magnificent tenderloin. Okay, we're at York Island. Now, York Island was the first of 2 stops where we could get off the boat and stretch our legs. It's just a tiny little island, just a dot on the map. And here a crew member is adjusting a pallet at the end of the ramp, so people going on and off, walking on and off to the beach won't get their feet wet. I went to the beach with 2 friends and I took some photographs.
Yeah, so this was the only place that I recollect they could not get the ramp right onto dry land. I think probably the clearance under the boat just wasn't enough. While Helen was relaxing on the beach, I went on a walk up an old road to a World War II gun emplacement. York Island sits right at the entrance, I think, to Discovery Passage, and the emplacement was protecting Johnstone Strait against possible invasion during World War II, when the threat from Japanese invasion was really quite real.
So that's the kind of thing that I saw that delighted me on the beach on York Island. It was sunny. There were colors of the fallen leaves, bright yellows, orange, green, and an interesting shape of the tree trunk. And that's our good friend Anne, whom I really enjoyed getting to know better, sitting on a handy rock on York Island. And there were contorted rock shapes decorated with bright yellow leaves, and I enjoyed that too. So when we left York Island, the weather changed a little bit for the worse, and I'm going to show you in a minute a video of some water coming over the bow. We did realize that some of the engines and the cars, and there were cars and trucks on board, I think, Richard, that probably were going to be splashed with salt water. So I had been up on the bridge talking to Philippe. Philippe is from Paris, so I enjoyed practicing my French with him. That was good. He goes back to Paris every year. Let's watch the video.
Yeah, so it's not the North Atlantic, but some of us were fingering our gravel and wondering if we needed any motion sickness protection.
The next day was incredibly wet. The passengers were divided into two groups and taken by taxi to the Umista Cultural Centre and Museum at Alert Bay. It's a wonderful museum. There's a spectacular display of carved masks and fascinating movies filmed at real potlatch ceremonies. We took off our wet coats and umbrellas, stored our umbrellas, and enjoyed a couple of hours in the warmth and dry. I'm showing that people with few mobility challenges can still manage a trip like this. You can see some canes in this photograph. People with canes could get to the bridge using inside staircases. They didn't have to go outside. These inside staircases were pretty steep, but they were still manageable. If you had a cane, it was more difficult to use the outside steel steps.
Yeah, so Helen mentions going outside. There were two decks where you could walk pretty much around the vessel and get some nice views, sit in the sun, etc.
So after that, we went to Echo Bay, and this is the landing for, again in the pouring rain, for Billy's Museum at Echo Bay. Billy was a character. He's really quite old. I think he was 90 something.
Mm-hmm.
And he collected absolutely everything. I was interested in these two dolls and the movie projector, but you could get household equipment, bottles, car magazines, anything you could think of, rooms full of stuff.
So along the way, we visited 3 different fish farms. Each is owned by an indigenous nation and operated in conjunction with a Norwegian company. The federal government is going to ensure that all of these open pen fish farms are closed by 2029. This one's still working. The netting here is over the tanks to stop birds being able to get in and steal the fish. We did visit another farm where the net was all rolled back. There was nothing in the tanks. So let's just have a look at another one. So this is where this is the first fish farm that is being closed. And so they had excess fish food, which they wanted to send back to get a refund for. So there's a forklift truck on the floating fish farm. It's lifted up a pallet with the fish food on it. On the boat, there's a second forklift, which is driven in. Now it's picked up the pallet. It's going to move back and drop the fish food in the right place on the boat. So that's how they exchange the cargo from the fish farm to the boat, where obviously the boat couldn't put down its ramp.
I just like to say that at the end of the cruise, one crow had discovered it could land on the pallets of fish food and peck into them and get one piece of fish food at a time. Just one crow.
Yeah, we were on one of the last trips of the season. Not surprisingly, and as Helen has already mentioned, it rained a lot. Yeah, rain is obviously very much a reality up in this part of the world, but I think you can still get some nice views and enjoy the change that the low cloud, the rain, and so on brings to the landscape. The captain alerted us to the fact that this tug was on its way to Alaska. If it did that today, of course, it would have to pay a toll. Just click the off button. In those days, it didn't. It was towing a barge. It's in Clio Channel, which is like a detour around the main inside passage. It had taken this detour to be in a calmer water with less wind. This is the barge that it's towing. It's got a lot of containers on it. It's also got a truck, a couple of cars, another truck back here. Quite interesting to see. This is one way they get freight from the lower 48 states and up to Alaska.
We're on shore now. There was a large van on board the boat, so they drove the van off the boat and put the passengers inside so we didn't have to get our feet wet and muddy being taken back to our cars. But I turned around and looked, and the weather was changing for the better, and I thought this was a pretty view. And that's our final slide, and it's the slide that I chose to put on Facebook with a message to my American friends saying Canada is not for sale. And I was pleased at the responses I got to that.
Yeah, so this was a wonderful trip, a Canadian trip, small boat, small number of people. We all got along. It was just great. So I'm going to stop sharing. Thanks very much for your attention.
So thanks, Richard and Helen, for a very well done presentation. And what we're going to do now is to go straight on to have Ben and Jenny give their presentation. Then we'll have time at the end for chit chat and discussion, questions, etc. So Ben and Jenny,
If anyone has questions for the Spencers, please speak up, while it's fresh. If not, okay, we'll go on.
So Ben and Jenny, I don't think you've been at these sessions before. Richard and Helen have been here many, many times, so they've introduced themselves and most people know them. Would you mind just introducing yourselves before you get started on the presentation, please?
Sure. I'm Jenny. My name's Jennifer Priest. I sound very British, but actually I was born on Vancouver Island, but I'm very happy to be living back in Vancouver. I'm a retired professor emeritus from the University of Maryland at College Park, and where I was also dean of the College of Information.
And I'm Ben Schneiderman, originally from New York, but had a 40-year career at the University of Maryland in the Department of Computer Science, and happy to be here and emeritus at UBC, thanks to the good work of some colleagues and friends to bring us into the Emeritus College, where we're continuing to explore and enjoy meeting other people.
Yes, and I'm at UMBC as well. We've both done sabbaticals here, and very appreciative to being part of the Emeritus College, and particularly to Paul for helping us to gain that. Okay, so our talk is entitled Aboard the MV Swell, Tour of Desolation Sound. And the first thing I want to mention is you might wonder why we were going at the end of April. And there are two reasons for that. First of all, we've heard an awful lot about Desolation Sound and how incredibly beautiful it is and how lovely it is. But we've also heard from boating friends that it gets very busy in the summer. So we were very interested to go out of the main summer tourist season to see this very beautiful area. And the second reason is that April is my birthday month, and I had a big birthday. And so this was a little celebration for going on my birthday. And this particular trip was run by Maple Leaf Adventures. It's a company that operates out of Victoria, and it runs a number of different trips. It goes up to Desolation Sound, obviously, right up to Alaska. It also goes to Haida Gwaii, and it goes around the Gulf Islands. So quite a big range. And like the Spencers, we started our trip up at Campbell River.
Actually, our trip is a very nice complement to the Spence trip. Also, we began in Campbell River and explored places that were not too far from Vancouver, where we live now. So the route, as drawn by the crew, showed us beginning at Campbell River, and this is somewhat to the south and east of where Broughton Archipelago is. But you see, we exited, we spent 4 nights anchored in very tranquil channels, and that worked out quite well. So it was a very nice and interesting exploration. This was definitely more of a tourist than a working ship, but it was a very cozy and pleasant experience. This 100-year-old tugboat called the Swell, who has been renovated many times. We spent 4 nights on the cabins there. They're tight like the ones that we saw before, but they're cozy, and each one has its own bathroom, and it's on the deck. The boat is about 100 feet long, I think it was. So it's smaller, it's shorter, but you could walk all around it. So you could do circuits of the boat if you wanted to get some steps and carry on. We had 10 passengers, and there were quite a few crew. There were 6 crew members. Sometimes they have just 4 or 5. And so we boarded and left from Campbell River, and then had the 4 nights. We were fortunate to have good weather during our trip, which made it quite pleasant. This is the main cabin where we had the lounge and the dinners, and you can see the crowd there, and some of the crew are eating with us as well. It was a very comfortable spot, and we enjoyed it. You can see on the right, we only showed you 1 dish, but they were very elegant foods and nicely prepared, and the chef was accommodating to demands that people had. So you got these very nice plates of very nice healthy mixtures of fish and meat and with vegetables and really good things, and nice cakes and so on that we had during the time. So the space was a comfortable one. You can see it's nicely furnished and polished, and a comfortable enough space to gather around, and nice for sort of sitting together and having a chat and meeting the people. There were an interesting bunch of people, 1 couple from Belgium and many Canadians, and I think some other Europeans.
1 American couple.
1 American couple. So we had a nice mixture of people. And Jenny?
Well, these are just some of the beautiful, beautiful views that we got. And like in the previous talk, we were able to get out in some places and go for walks and adventures. And we'll tell you a little bit about some of those a bit further on, but you can see the very attractive, almost Matterhorn-like little peak in the distance.
Yeah. And, the captain, Matt, was very skillful in taking us around in tranquil places. You could see how smooth the water was in this anchorage for one of the nights. It was just really almost mirror quality still, and a lovely spot. You can see also the Zodiac boats that we would get on and get off of to go ashore and explore different places. So that made it very nice. Now, the highlight of the trip, I would say, was coming to
Middlenatch Island.
Middlenatch Island.
This is, and I'm particularly, well, both of us are very interested in wildlife and nature, but this was a real highlight of the trip. It's Middlenatch Island. It's actually a provincial park now, but it used to be owned by a family called the Manson family, and they used to rear sheep there. And the sheep used to be butchered and brought over to different parts of the mainland and Vancouver Island to be sold. And in fact, we have a neighbor upstairs who's a little older than us, and she remembers going and buying legs of lamb and half sheep and things that came across from Middlenatch Island. Now, Middlenatch Island, it's sometimes referred to as the Galapagos of British Columbia. It became a provincial park in 1959, and it's the only way to describe it is that it's an exciting and an absolutely charming, very interesting small island. It still has a few sheep on it. It is taken care of by the provincial park, and you can see that there's various of us standing down on the beach. We also got to see sea lions, Stelis sea lions and California sea lions on this trip, and also seals. And should we do the next slide?
Yeah.
And I was particularly interested in the plants as well as the animals. You'll see at each end of this slide, there are two camas flowers. Now, the blue one is the one that you usually see, the blue camas, and it's quite beautiful. It's flowers, obviously, at this time of year. And it's been a source of sustenance for First Nations, both here and also in America. And if you've read the Lewis and Clark stories, you will remember that the First Nations in America also survived on camas bulbs. So, but they're quite beautiful. But the one on the left is quite a different story. That one is a deadly camas. And the First Nations used to use the sort of sap of that plant to basically add to their spears to kill animals, etc. So the flowers and the trees there were very rich, and the wildlife was very rich too. And for that reason, it's also, next slide, it's also a place that not only the National Park Service, but also students training and learning about the national park come to. And this very charming gentleman on the left is Ken Graham is leading a group of students who stay in this charming old hut that is sort of put together partly wood from the island, I think, also driftwood. It's been there quite a long time, and the students were very excited to be there. They got pretty nice weather. They cooked for themselves. They learned a lot about the wildlife and the flora of the island. You can see they collected a whole set of pieces of skeleton, and they were recording bird nesting. It's an important bird nesting site as well.
It was just fun to see them. This character, Ken Graham, he stays there all the time, and the students come for a week or 2 weeks, and they live there. And it's a kind of rugged shack, not much more than a shack, but there's solar panels to provide electricity for their laptops and for the refrigerator to keep the food supplies there. But it's a very isolated place, and it's meant to be that way so as to not disturb the birds and the other population. And speaking of birds, here's what we saw. This was a series of 6 turkey vultures circling, I believe.
Yeah, it's a lovely place to see birds. There were a pair of nesting eagles. There were also 4 or 5 eagles circling around. It's a gull colony. Those are glaucous wings. And so we moved around it very carefully and very gently to see those. And Ken was very careful to make sure that we treaded lightly everywhere.
Right. It's a small island, so you can walk all around to see all the parts of it. And we enjoyed that. And you can see we had sunlight and clear blue skies that day, or a few clouds in the distance. So it made it pretty nice. This trip has a nice sort of quality of comfort and adventure. And we were ready for the adventures. And so you'd get bundled up and get on the Zodiacs and go for a ride off. Or you can see we also did some kayaking here and there, and explored to see the petroglyphs on the walls, and to learn about the different parts of it and just have some fun. So it turned out to be nice. And speaking of fun, there was afternoon little tea snack, or tea was serviced with quite ample little appetizers to get started before dinner. So that was always a nice time, a time to gather with people and sit together. And there was even way beyond the luxury of the Spence marine landing boat, we had a hot tub. So you could crawl into the hot tub to relax and enjoy, which we did on a couple of occasions. It was, modest-sized hot tub, but it was quite a nice of a treat to have. And that's it. We settled down in the evenings, and here again, another one of the safe harbors where Matt, the captain, found place to bring us for a quiet night on the boat. It was very comfortable. We didn't have any problems of seasickness or or any of those concerns, and it worked out very well. So it was a relaxing and pleasant kind of trip. I think 4 nights was probably enough.
Yeah, but it was very special. We also saw the marbled murrelets, which are endangered bird species now. They're endangered because they They nest on old growth, very high up, a single egg is laid and the chick drops many feet down to the ground and somehow or other miraculously makes its way into the water. So the crew were very knowledgeable, and it was very interesting to hear, about the local geography, also about the old tugboat, and also about the wildlife. And Ben took a few minutes at the end to write a little poem to thank the crew for their work. So here is Ben's ending.
Right,
presentation.
These kind of trips, maybe yours also ended with a kind of gathering and just sort of saying farewell over the final meal. So this was my ode to the Maple Leaf Swell. There's a story I'd like to tell about a tugboat named Swell. Our journey was sweet. The crew was a treat. In daytime, the sunshine was bright, and then the stars came out fully at night. The bears, ducks, seals were just right, making the trip a thorough delight. And that was it. And so, as these trips do, they provided this sort of summary slide with collections of photos from people who were willing to upload them. But that Swell, you can see this old tugboat converted into cabins for crew and for passengers. So it's a nice thing. I recommend it as a nice idea. They seem to go. We went to the Maple Leaf page, and there's actually a few cabins still left for the ones in the next few weeks, but then it gets pretty busy and filled up. So you can look on the Maple Leaf Adventures. Maple Leaf runs 3 boats. There's this one, which is the old Swell tugboat. There's a modern catamaran with 24 cabins, which supposedly is quite nice, and then a more rugged sailboat where the cabins are open. You sleep in hammocks or beds or separated by curtains. So it's a little more rugged and less privacy. We chose the privacy of having our own cabin here. And, you may actually want to choose the bunk bed cabins, because the cabins that are large enough to sleep together, one person has to crawl over the other to get out.
I did the crawling.
But the bunk beds seem like a good alternative as well. Some are a little bigger, some are a little smaller, but it was all in all a very nice trip that I'm happy to recommend. And we might take the one that Helen and Richard took. So thank you for introducing to us, and we hope this is something you'll enjoy too. And we're happy to answer questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben and Jenny. And now I'll just leave it open for people to ask questions and comments. I'm just going to change my view here to gallery view. Okay.
Well, I have a question for Ben. Ben, overnight, was there a generator running on the ship to keep the power on? And was it at all, did you hear it very much?
No, it's not a generator. They do have an inverter. I think we had written a little story about it, but yes, they run the inverter overnight, so it's rather quieter, but there's still enough power to run lights or whatever you need to have there. I should say Matt ran an open cabin, open cockpit, so that you could come up anytime, and he was happy to talk and show you the navigation and so on. And let's see, I did, in my notes here.
And while Ben's looking for that, the naturalists were fantastic. They were always available and happy to answer questions about the wildlife. We did see one there as well. We saw a lot of different birds, and that was really nice. They were just charming, really informed, knowledgeable young people who loved doing the jobs that they were doing.
So here's from the notes we were taking. I wrote, First Mate Brian took care of the engine and gave us a tour of below decks equipment, which left a strong impression of how much skill was needed to keep our boat going. He had taken small motor vessel operation courses at the Western Marine Institute, passed certifications from Canadian maritime authorities. The original engine was replaced with a used 1981 Detroit diesel engine, whose 750 horsepower drove the Swell forward at 8 to 9 knots. The 14,000-liter diesel fuel tank and 5,000-liter water tank gave you an idea of what it takes to run this boat. Generator, inverter, desalinator, sewage system, firefighting pumps, other equipment packed the engine room, but the freezer, fridge, dishwasher, clothes washer, and dryer are tucked away elsewhere. Chef Nick ran the kitchen, turning out healthy gourmet quality meals, which he had carefully planned, and shop in Victoria and Campbell River. So there you go. A little more of the details for the technology.
Good. Don Blake.
Hi, thanks. I really enjoyed both presentations. Richard and Helen gave us an idea of what the cost was for their trip. What was the price range for the MV Swell?
We think it was 4,000 a person. It may change. I was looking for it for this year's expedition. So let's see. If you go Gulf Springs,
It's 3,000
3,550
for Gulf
for
Springs.
Gulf Springs.
Desolation Sound
Desolation Sound and Spring, 3,950 up to 5,300.
depends on the cabin that you have,
Yeah.
depends on the time, on the month in the year when you go.
So much more curated.
That one's waitlisted already.
Thank you very much.
But Desolation Sound and Spring, 2 cabins remaining April 29th to May 3rd. So you can get on that.
We really liked the Swell. For us, it was a good combination. It wasn't sort of too luxurious, but we also we didn't want to sleep in hammocks and have no privacy. So it was a good compromise. And we liked having the smaller number of people.
I think there are a couple of people in the audience who are on the boat with us. If they would like to step up, that would be interesting to hear their viewpoints.
By all means, please.
No, they're shy.
I can add a comment. My photograph behind me is actually taken from a cabin on the east side of Cortez Island, and we're actually looking up Desolation Sound. This is in a summer sunset where you've got some sunshine coming from behind here. And to orient people, West Redonda is on the left, and Kinghorn Island at the entrance to the Sound is on the right. But we have the pleasure of watching it in all seasons, and it is absolutely as delightful as presented. It's a magnificent spot.
I think, to advocate for this, it's relatively easy to do. You do have to get to Campbell River. So you probably want to go and, spend one night there, and then you'll take the boat the next day. And so, but it's convenient, it's easy, and, it gave, as we're still learning our way around British Columbia, this gave us another taste of things that we had to see. We had also taken a 7-day trip that was to the Great Bear Rainforest.
That was with an American company that we've traveled with many times called Natural Habitat Adventures. But even then, we were very keen to go with a Canadian company and be surrounded by Canadians. I think we all feel that even more now.
Just an aside, I have a cabin on Sonora Island, and my husband and I used Marine Link to deliver the building materials when we built our cabin way back in the early 90s.
How often do you go, Elizabeth?
Oh, 3 or 4, 5 times a year.
Lovely.
And how do you get there?
Water taxi from Campbell River.
Yes, if I could just make a point based on Helen's invitation as someone else who was on the Marine Link, what I felt about that trip was I wasn't seeing as much a tourist side of BC coast, and I would like someday to visit Desolation Sound, and your presentation has certainly piqued that interest. But what I really felt I experienced was what the working life of coastal British Columbia. This was very much a working vessel, and you had to be up for that and appreciate that aspect of it. But it was actually quite interesting. This is how people lived. This is how the coast was served. And even when the weather was bad, that's the reality of life there. So I just want to say that was another dimension. It's a different dimension, but I think it had its own advantages.
Yeah, I think if you take this trip, as Anne says, that's what you should expect and hope to enjoy. It is a great insight into, how things are done, how stuff gets up there, the people who take it there, the people who are there to get it, and so forth. Yeah.
There's another company called Mothership Adventures. They mostly do kayaking trips, but once or twice a year they do more or less a history trip where they take you and explain the history of the coast. It's very similar to the one that the Schneidermans went on, but they actually when I was on it, they had a curator from the Campbell River Museum explaining, and it was incredibly, and one of the places we went was Middle Natch, and so that's another company that you might want to look into, and their prices are comparable.
Yeah, there's yet another one called Get West, which goes from Gold River. It has day cruises, but also overnight cruises as well on other boats that seem also to be working ships. Nootka Sound day cruises and overnight adventure cruises, Pequot, 2 nights, Thursday, Friday. So there's, ways you can try these things out and explore the rugged coast, and lovely. Wish you good weather and sunshine.
I guess I could make one more comment, and that is it's a very complex geography up in the archipelago. And I'm sure many of you would do this, but I was using as one of my cameras an iPhone from which I got the GPS coordinates every time we stopped. And as we traveled, I dropped pins into Google Earth. And so that enabled me to unconfuse, at least to some degree, where we had been, because we were doubling back, we were going around islands, we were stopping at little places that really weren't named. So that added a little bit of interest for me, and it enabled me to do that rather poorly drawn map that I showed you with the colored lines on it. So yeah, that added quite a lot of interest, something I couldn't have done a few years ago, but it's pretty easy to do now.
And it was interesting to me that they would take vessels and equipment off the boat, leave it somewhere, and then come back and pick it up later. Obviously, there was a plan, but it was a little bit confusing at times.
Yeah, and on occasion, according to the company, they would get a phone call going, if you have time, there's somebody who'd like something picked up somewhere, and so they would change their route and go and get it. It was very much hands-on, and as Anne said, as a working vessel, and with all that entails.
So for those who are not following the chat, Peter Wing, who's on the Zoom link, says he's in a noisy environment, so he doesn't want to talk. But they've kayaked from Mothership Adventures Columbia 3 boat, and it was wonderful. Peter and his partner Claire.
And I know Ralph Matthews is on this call. I wonder if you have any comments, Ralph. You were on the trip with us.
I thought you did a remarkable job, and I thought Anne's insight was also excellent. The one thing we didn't get was the indigenous experience of the coast. We got the industrialized coast, but I wonder if it would seem to me an opportunity for indigenous people to have similar companies, similar cruises.
I was going to ask you about that, Ralph, because I remember that our cook, Kelsey, was talking about a potlatch that was going to happen, which they didn't think people could get to because it was very wet, but I wasn't sure of those details. Do you remember that?
No, I wasn't part of that conversation. I have spent, in the 20 years I've been in BC, I'd spent a lot of my previous time looking at communities in rural Newfoundland, and I basically switched coasts. And so I've, for a variety of lucky occurrences, ended up going to a number of First Nation communities and working with them in various ways. And so I have a fair sense of a different culture. What we saw, it seems to me, was we saw the nature. And I remember those whales just wanting to go up that Narrows with us, which was really quite wonderful. And the nature was excellent. We saw the industrialization and deindustrialization of the coast. We were there with the First Nation, basically with the fish farm basically ending its operation as a result of federal plans. And we didn't get much sense except within the UMESTA Cultural Center, which I'd been through a number of times before, that of indigenous life on the coast, which is quite vibrant at this point.
Well, I suppose Billy's museum was indigenous.
Village Museum was everything.
It was. Yes.
He collects everything, but one's not quite sure what he makes of it all.
The history tour with Mothership Adventures does a lot of indigenous, goes into a lot of old Indian villages and clamshell bays, and looks at petroglyphs, and so one of their very strong focuses is the indigenous life on the coast. And the Columbia 3, which is the main vessel for Mothership Adventures, was the first one was an old hospital ship that used to go in and up and down the coast and service all the indigenous villages and bring health care. And so there's a quite, that particular aspect of the services that they offer is well worth looking at.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
One little comment.
Jean, please.
This isn't about the actual trips that our friends have taken, but I noticed that Ben mentioned there was no seasickness on the trip. And Richard said at one point, well, we didn't quite know when the weather changed, whether we should surcharge our gravel. One of the things I was told years ago by my family doctor, who sailed the coast with her husband constantly with their sailboat, just take crystallized ginger. Take ginger. Don't worry about anything else. And as we get older and on multiple medications, ginger is probably one of the safer things and does not make you drowsy. And I've been down cruising to Hawaii, Panama Canal, Bermuda, where it has been very rough at times. No sign of seasickness at all. And then Alaska, Johnny and I used to do every year just as a little week's getaway. Never suffered with seasickness. Just a little tip.
Thank you.
Very helpful.
Well, again, I wish to thank the Spencers and Ben and Jenny for 2 interesting presentations. And I expect some of us in the audience will look at some of these tours a bit more closely now that we've had the pleasure of listening to these presentations. Our next meeting is going to be on April the 10th, and Nancy Langton, who is co-host today and is also the co-convener of the travel group, and who is also part of the photography group of the Emeritus College and very much into photography, is going to give us a talk on her recent trip to south part of southern India. Nancy, did you wish to unmute yourself and just say something briefly for the group here?
Yes, so thank you, Paul. Mostly I'll be talking, my trip was only in southern India in Tamil Nadu, and we covered a number of different towns, cities in that area. And we had a variety of cultural experiences, a variety of food experiences, some travel experiences. So I'll tell you a number of things about this. It was most certainly a photography trip in the sense that the leader of the trip, who was based in San Francisco, it was for many, many years a National Geographic photographer. And so that was some emphasis on our trip. But it was a really great trip. I was there for about 3 weeks. So I look forward to telling you about it.
Thanks very much, Nancy. And let me go to view the gallery again. After the April trip, we already have a presentation set for May on Africa by rail. I will talk about Iceland and Greenland in June. And Kay-Tess will talk about Newfoundland in July. I'm looking for presenters for September and November. We already have Tony Chow who's going to talk to us about Hong Kong and China in October.
Wow, great.
So we have a good lineup of presentations already planned, and we need at least 2 more speakers to fill out the year. So I'm looking for volunteers, as I'm usually am. And I give priority to people who haven't presented before. If new people would like to present, that would be wonderful. But if not, I take people who presented previously. So again, thanks to the presenters today. Thanks for all of you who have attended. We've had good participation, about almost 50 people who have been on the Zoom link. So thank you, and we look forward.
Paul, for arranging all this so diligently and providing informative notices on a regular basis. We're pleased to have contributed to this and glad to meet some of you and tell our story to you, and look forward to seeing you in person at UBC Emeritus events.
And I have one more thing in the chat that's come up, again from Peter and Claire. They did a trip, they said, with MV Atlas along the coast of Haida Gwaii in 2023, and that brought us very close to many indigenous communities. So again, another option for getting more involvement with indigenous populations. So thank you all, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.